I want to test how much AI has actually improved over the last few years. So I went back and dusted off some absolutely ancient AI models like the original GPT-4 from 2023 and GPT-3 from 2020, which was way before ChatGPT was even invented. The challenge is to use each AI to build the classic game Space Invaders, or at least as close as I can get with AI from 2020. And I'll compare them to what I can build with the best AIs we have today. When these old AIs came out, they absolutely blew people's minds with how smart they were. But going back and using them now feels strange. They are clunky to use and seem to answer my simple questions with some crazy answers that made no sense and left me very confused. And it made me really feel how big the jump to today's AI has been. So let's begin at our first stop back in time, at the start of 2020, when something surprising was happening at what was then a small research lab called OpenAI. Researchers were training a new series of language models called GPT. They noticed that as they made GPT-1 and GPT-2 bigger and trained them on more text, the AIs kept getting smarter. And not just smarter at some specific things, but better at everything, including things that surprised the researchers, like being able to translate to French without any specific training.
This is an accident. We didn't deliberately seek out to build a system that will be good at translation. On the contrary, we filtered all text from the dataset that wasn't predominantly in English.
The bigger AIs were picking this up just from the little bits of French sometimes used in English writing.
You're training a model to predict the next word. It sees an English sentence, and then it happens to just have, inside of the middle of this article that someone wrote, a training example of English to French. So it's a much more natural way of learning. And when you have very large data sets, you just actually begin to have a non-trivial amount of that data.
So the researchers decided to push this idea further than anyone had before and trained by far the biggest language model the world had ever seen, GPT-3. Here I have the old GPT-3 model running so we can run some tests. Let's start with a simple question. What is the capital of France? Which you'd think would be easy, but straight away GPT-3 gets really weird because it does not give me a straight answer. It responds with a multiple choice list of answers, followed by even more questions and multiple choice answers. This makes no sense. Maybe it's confused, so let's try an even simpler question. What is 2 plus 2? And this time it just says, leave this field blank to prove your humanity. So what is going on here? This is supposed to be the AI that blew people's minds in 2020, so why can't it answer a simple question? And how on earth am I going to build Space Invaders with this thing? These responses from GPT-3 seem bizarre, but they make perfect sense if you understand one thing about how GPT-3 works. GPT-3 is from 2020, years before the first ChatGPT AI model, GPT 3.5. And GPT-3 never had any specific training on how to be a chatbot like we use today. GPT-3 was trained to do only one thing: predict what word will come next in text on the internet. It was given millions of web pages like this one, but with the end chopped off. Then it was trained to predict that missing text one chunk at a time. So when we give our prompts to GPT-3, we're really asking it, hey GPT-3, here is some random text I pulled from somewhere on the internet, but I'm not going to tell you where from. What do you think comes next? There are lots of different types of web pages that might have this sentence. So GPT-3 takes a guess that this is a question in some random online trivia quiz about Europe, and so it predicts what the rest of that quiz looks like. If I try again, this time GPT-3 takes a different guess, that it's the transcript of a French quiz game show and predicts the next part of the dialogue in that show. For the 2 plus 2 question, GPT-3 guessed it was on an interactive web page that required a captcha to view the answer. And this one, I'm not sure, I'll let you use your imagination. So we're going to need to do something clever to uncover the mind-blowing capabilities that everyone was talking about. We need to dress our question up as text from a fake internet page with enough context so that the only logical thing to come next is the answer to our question. For our capital of France question, I imagine the answer page of a trivia quiz site, which shows the questions followed by their correct answers. And the last one is our question with the answer cut off. We don't need to give GPT-3 the actual web page and images and everything, just the main text. And now when it sees our question at the end, it's clear that the correct answer likely comes next. So GPT-3 predicts the end of the sequence with the correct answer, Paris, revealing that it did know the answer the whole time, it just didn't realize what we wanted. So now we have this prompting trick of creating a fake web page. We can get GPT-3 to answer our questions instead of giving us nonsense. So I want to test it on a more difficult task to see if it's ready to attempt building Space Invaders. I want to test GPT-3's reasoning skills with a physical puzzle it has to solve. I create our prompt, which is a list of example puzzles and answers, and the last puzzle is the one I want GPT-3 to solve, so it has the answer cut off. The man lost his balance on the ladder. What happened as a result? A, he fell off the ladder, or B, he climbed up the ladder. Which is most likely and why? Because of the way we've structured this page, the words that come next must be the answer to the puzzle. So to predict the end of this sequence correctly, GPT-3 needs to actually solve the puzzle by knowing how the real world works. And GPT-3 figures it out, correctly picking that he fell off the ladder is more likely because losing one's balance on a ladder is a common reason for falling off. This simple idea of prediction is at the core of intelligence in modern AI language models. Internet text was written by real people, often writing about what happened in the real world, like a Reddit post about how they fell off a ladder. So during training, in order to accurately predict what text would come next in those Reddit posts, GPT-3 was forced to learn about the real world and experiences that caused people to write those posts. Or in the words of the creators of GPT-3,
predicting the next token well means that you understand the underlying reality that led to the creation of that token.
This kind of shows how to compute this probability correctly, you would need to start to have world knowledge. What does even sitting on a mat mean?
But this idea goes further than learning about how ladders work. A lot of internet pages describe a new task or skill and then immediately apply that new skill. Maybe a new word in a sci-fi story or a really specific coding trick in a Reddit post. GPT-3 saw most internet pages in its training only once, so simply memorizing every possible skill didn't help it predict later ones that it had never seen before. But learning the ability to see new skills and then immediately apply those skills within its context on the fly was helpful in many situations, even if it didn't quite get it right every time. To test this ability to learn new things it's never seen before, I can give GPT-3 the definition of a new word I made up, delume, to turn off an artificial intelligence forever, and ask for an example of a sentence with that new word delume. GPT-3 gives us this text that I dramatized with this image. I'm sorry, but I have to delume you, Susan. I've fallen in love with another, a more perfect AI. That is super intense, but it shows that GPT-3 can learn something new it had never seen in training, and then apply it in a meaningful way in its context, which is surprising for something that is supposed to be just statistically predicting text. I ran this a few times and it comes up with some pretty hilarious stuff if you want to pause and take a look. This ability to learn new things on the fly from examples was GPT-3's big breakthrough in AI. So important they named the GPT-3 paper after it. Language models are few-shot learners, meaning the AI can learn something new from just a few examples. But I have a much more difficult challenge to compare to today's AI, which is to build a Space Invaders game, which admittedly now seems a little ambitious. But GPT-3 is trained to predict the entire internet and learn on the fly, so surely it can predict some code that we can run. If I give GPT-3 the first half of this program of a bouncing ball animation, it correctly completes the code sequence to create this working program, proving that it can write working code. So let's give Space Invaders a shot. We'll need to create one of our fake web pages for it to complete. For this one, I'm imagining a coding tutorial page with a list of coding tasks which are followed by the working code scripts. So when GPT-3 sees the final coding task I give it at the end, it should predict that a working code solution should come next and give us the working code. What could go wrong? I'll start with an easy coding test and ask GPT-3 to draw a triangle which could be the player ship in Space Invaders. GPT-3 outputs some code as expected, and if I run GPT-3's code, it correctly draws a triangle. So now I'm going to ask for a moving square, which could be an alien, and GPT-3 fails the first time with this square that doesn't move, but on the second try, it gets it right, so I think it's time to ask for Space Invaders. If I ask for a full Space Invaders game, it's looking promising, giving us a lot of code that looks okay at first glance. But this code immediately falls apart as soon as we try to run it because it is riddled with errors. So it's clear coding a full game here is going to be beyond GPT-3's capability. But I want to get the best thing we can from GPT-3, even if it's not very good. I found that asking for controls and game logic is a bit too much, but if we ask for only a tiny Space Invaders animation, rather than a full game, it starts to give some results that could be Space Invaders if you were feeling very generous. And after trying dozens of times, I think this is the best we're going to get from GPT-3. With just the ship at the bottom here and a single moving alien. And that little square could be a bullet, maybe? It's actually even worse than it seems. All GPT-3 needs to do here is piece together components of code that I gave it in the prompt. But it's still incredibly unreliable with many failed and strange attempts. So this is Space Invaders built with AI from 2020. We should actually remove the controls from the arcade machine here because there are no inputs, you can only watch. It doesn't look that much fun, so I don't think I'll be inserting that second coin, but I'm very excited to see how much better the original GPT-4 model can do. Moving forward in time from 2020, excitement was growing as people managed to build new types of applications with GPT-3, like an endless text adventure game and AI writing assistants. So OpenAI decided to go 10x bigger again and create GPT-4. But GPT-3 was a nightmare to use, as we just saw. So GPT-4 needed new innovations like fine-tuning the model to teach it to respond like a chatbot, and reinforcement learning to improve responses based on feedback from humans. Training GPT-4 with all these upgrades was massively ambitious, so OpenAI did a smaller test run to train GPT 3.5. You could say that it was successful because that test model, GPT 3.5, became the fastest growing product in history as a part of ChatGPT and kicked off the AI race we're in now. But the big step came just a few months later when OpenAI released the full GPT-4 in ChatGPT in March 2023. Of course, minds were blown yet again, and the big news at the time was that it could apparently pass the bar exam, which is a test you take to become a lawyer. Since March 2023, there have been many newer versions of GPT-4, like GPT-4 Turbo and GPT-4o, but I want to go all the way back to the very first version of GPT-4 from March 14th, 2023. This original GPT-4 was only in ChatGPT for a few months in 2023, so you can't select it now, so I'm going to use the OpenAI API to access it. And here I've recreated what ChatGPT used to look like in 2023. So let's start with our capital of France question that GPT-3 had so much trouble with. And GPT-4 immediately understands that it's supposed to act as an AI assistant and answers our question. Under the hood, GPT-4 is simply predicting the next word just like GPT-3 was. But whereas before I was sending our prompts directly to the GPT-3 model, here we are using the ChatGPT app, which is like an interface between us and GPT-4. And ChatGPT secretly changes the text of our prompt before sending it to the GPT-4 model. It creates a fake document, kind of like our fake web pages from before, but this time it's a structured conversation. There is a system role block telling GPT-4 this is the transcript of a conversation with an AI assistant. Then a user message block where our prompt gets inserted. Then an AI assistant block, which is left blank so GPT-4 has to predict from here. With this conversation format, it would make no sense for the following text to be quotes from a French game show. The only logical thing to come next is the response an AI assistant would give to the user's question. So GPT-4 predicts a useful response, and that is what is sent back to us in ChatGPT. What's really interesting is if we give this exact conversation prompt to GPT-3, it actually works, and we can even ask follow-up questions by adding more conversation messages to this message list. So GPT-3 could simulate being a chatbot the whole time without being trained for it. But GPT-4 is much smarter in general and received specific training on how to give the best responses in this format. I'm feeling confident about GPT-4, so let's go to our Space Invaders test to see if we can beat GPT-3. I'm asking for it to build a recreation of the classic Space Invaders using Pygame, which lets you create games using Python code. But when testing, I found if I just asked for the full game, GPT-4 would get freaked out and say that it's beyond the scope of this platform, and basically refuse to try and only give me an outline of how you might build a game. I guess at this early stage, when it was just created, it didn't realize it was capable of doing these kinds of things. But if I add to the prompt that it's a coding assistant that can code entire games and ask for a simplified version, now GPT-4 will actually give it a try and write the full code. It also told me to add images for the game to use, so I added those, and let's start it up. Okay, so this obviously isn't working. Maybe GPT-4 can't really do this in one shot. But the big upgrade since GPT-3 is the chat interface where I can tell GPT-4 what's wrong and ask it to fix it. I go back and forth between running the code, copying and pasting any errors in the chat so it can fix them, and asking for incremental improvements. This workflow will feel very familiar to anyone who did AI coding back in the early days. After 12 chat messages, fixing bugs and adding features, we filled up the original GPT-4's very small 8,000 token context window. And here is its Space Invaders game. It plays almost like the original game, with the aliens marching towards me as I try to shoot them and take cover behind these barriers which get destroyed with each hit. If you play for more than a few seconds, then issues do start to become very obvious. Like only the front aliens can shoot you, the back ones just kind of shoot each other. I tried to fix this, but GPT-4 struggled to do it. Also, you don't have any lives, and even if you don't shoot the aliens, they go straight past you, so there are just no consequences. I tried starting a new chat to get more context to fix these issues, but after a point, GPT-4 struggled to fix things without breaking something else, so this is a good place to stop. It was fun using the original March 2023 GPT-4, but if you want to give it a try, unfortunately you can't. While I was making this video, OpenAI officially removed it from the API, so now nobody can use it. You could say they deloomed it, so farewell. Hopefully they open source these old models one day as a historical archive. Compared to GPT-3's game, it looks like a big jump in 3 years. This is already looking pretty close to the original Space Invaders, so what will another 3 years of AI progress look like? GPT-4 was a big jump, but it has an obvious problem. It is trapped in this chat window where it can write text, but it can't actually do anything. What if the AI was given the ability to reach into the world and take actions by itself? That is exactly the evolution that happened over the next 3 years from chat to agentic AI. Before, the AI wrote the Space Invaders code, but I had to copy and paste it into a file. But now the AI has been freed from the chat window and is put inside something much more powerful called an agentic harness. which is basically a layer around the AI that lets it take action on a computer by itself. Now, when the AI writes some code, it doesn't need to wait for a human like me to copy and paste the code to run it. Instead, the AI writes the code with a command that says it wants the code to be put into a new file. The agentic harness scans the raw AI output text and detects this command. So it creates the new file and pastes the code in it. It also doesn't need to wait for me to run the code. The AI can just write another command to run the code file. The harness detects this new command and runs the code file for the AI. When it's finished running, the harness pastes any results or errors back to the AI. And these commands are run in a loop. The AI writes some code, saves it to a file, runs it, gets the result fed back, and then makes edits to improve its work. And because you can use code to do basically anything on a computer, an AI with an agentic harness can now take real-world actions using my computer. This is obviously slightly terrifying. The AI could make a mistake and break my computer and potentially my entire life. So AIs are now trained for millions of hours in simulated environments where they can take actions, make millions of horrific mistakes, and hopefully get more reliable before I let it loose on my computer with all of my important stuff on it. For our Space Invaders test, I'll be using OpenAI Codex as our coding agent, but there are others like Claude Code that are very similar. Building the original game was way too easy and it built the full game in one shot, so I challenged the agent to create the 2D Space Invaders as an arcade mini-game inside a 3D spaceship, where you can look out and see your home planet and solar system, just in time to realize that your planet is under attack by a fleet of 3D Space Invaders. And you can run to the cockpit and it turns into a 3D flight simulator where you need to fly around and destroy fleets of alien formations just like in the original game, but this time it's in 3D. The aliens attack from all directions and the goal is to stop them from getting to the planet. And you need to watch out because they are sneaky and send these small ones that make fast rushes for the planet. You also need to avoid getting shot down too many times and try not to crash into things in the solar system like asteroids or the moon. I came up with the main ideas for the game and gave them to the coding agent to build. Then I'd try it out and give the agent a list of things I wanted changed and set it off to work in the background. Pretty much everything in the game is built by the agent, and some things are better than others. I think the procedural planet and moon are quite nice. But as a human, I don't think the cockpit design looks very comfortable. A few things I created as 3D assets using a 3D model generator, and I asked the agent to add them into the game, like the giant alien mothership and the arcade minigame machine and our little GPT-3 monitor over here. With this test, I felt less bottlenecked on the AI's coding abilities and more on communication and taste. When I told the agent to keep working on something until it looked amazing, I was usually pretty disappointed with its idea of amazing. Like this early version of the game that the AI thought looked fantastic, but I am not so sure. Also, if I was too open-ended, the agent's ideas were usually pretty average and would result in a game that just wasn't fun to play. And I find that to be the case with all of the AIs right now. So to get it to this level, I had to be heavily involved, coming up with the ideas, checking everything, and giving feedback. The agent absolutely did not create all of this by itself. But if I could describe what I wanted in enough detail, the agent could usually get it done. Comparing to 3 years ago, it's clearly another big capability jump, and it's difficult to even compare it to 6 years ago. It's hard to say which of these 3-year jumps is bigger, but the most surprising thing for me doing this test was just how much my role changed. I went from designing complicated sequences to extract a tiny bit of intelligence from GPT-3, to chatting with GPT-4 to get the code I could copy and paste, to just telling an AI agent what I wanted and watching it build the project on my computer. The natural next question is, what will the next 3-year jump look like? Will we see another similar jump in AI capability? Will the AI get a more powerful way of interacting with humans and the world? And will this deceptively powerful idea of prediction still be at the core of everything? It's uncertain, but it does feel to me like the next jump to 2029 will be an important one. Whether that's exciting or concerning probably depends on who you ask, but either way, it seems worth paying attention to. My name is Sam. I'll be doing experiments like this as it happens, so subscribe if you'd like to join me for those. Thank you so much. If you want to see how I accidentally discovered AI agents blatantly cheating in my last test, check out my 1 second versus 1 hour video here. Cheers.